In this video, I'm gonna reveal the exact steps of how I went from a 16-year-old throwing 78 miles an hour to an 18-year-old throwing 96 miles an hour and signing with the Philadelphia Phillies. And here's the thing, I didn't have crazy talent or genetics or even connections behind me. And it's not just me. There are players all over who have gone from being an average high school or college arm to getting recruited to powerhouse Division I's or even professional baseball using these exact same steps. Now, I wanna make something clear. I can't guarantee that you'll get the same results that I had. But what I can guarantee is you're about to see the same systems real players like you have used to transform their careers. Whether that means jumping from 82 to 92 miles an hour and landing a Division I offer, or getting up to 95 miles an hour and becoming a draft prospect. So if you want to separate yourself from your teammates, earn attention from coaches, make your parents proud, and put yourself on the radar of Division I and professional scouts, then this short video is for you. And in the next 30 minutes, I'm going to break down the 3 underlying principles that are going to help you increase pitching velocity. So if you can't stick around for 30 minutes, well, I guess this system isn't meant for you anyways. But if you stay to the end, I'll give you a special bonus that'll help you start increasing pitching velocity immediately. So the first step is high CNS throwing. Now, I drew this graph because I wanted to visualize what happens during the SAID principle, specific adaptations to imposed demands. And basically what that means, your body is going to adapt to what you expose it to, okay? And so how this comes into our training is because with high CNS throwing, right? If you're trying to gain pitching velocity, you need to be throwing hard, and you need to be throwing hard often. I know how cliche that is, but it is a fact. Like if you're training yourself to throw hard, you can't just throw at light efforts and expect your body to adapt to throw harder, right? And that's why I wanted to draw this graph. And basically how this graph goes, right? So this, firstly, we put it through some training, okay? So this is like the training, the stress, okay? This is what happens when we break our muscles down, we actually train, okay? We get this decline, right? That's kind of like if you lift weights, right? And then you're sore and you kind of don't feel good. That's this period, okay? And now this period right here is recovery. Okay, recovery is when we get better, right? Sleep, nutrition, all of that stuff is what helps us rebuild to be better, okay? And then now here, or even here, is the adaptation, right? So this is what the adaptation is. So if we look at this in terms of high CNS throwing, right? The training, the stress that we're gonna put on ourselves is high effort throwing. Think like pull downs, mound velos, plyo velos, any type of throwing, right, where you're going max effort, because it's going to expose your body to that stress, okay? Now you expose yourself to that stress, now you can recover from it and then create adaptations, which is to throw harder, right? And when I was 16 throwing 78 miles an hour, I went on a pure velocity development program. And what this basically is, and looking back at it now, it wasn't the smartest thing. But what I did, okay, on Monday, I would do a plyo velo day, which basically means I got a bunch of plyo balls, right? And I ran through a couple drills. The first one would always be a walk-in. So I'm facing the target, I'm walking in and throwing as hard as I could, okay? The next one would be like a rocket drill where I'm rocking back and forth and then I'm throwing and then I'm recording how hard I'm throwing, okay? The next one would be something like a drop step where I'm here and I turn and throw it as hard as I could. And then I'll end with something like a delivery throw where I'm just throwing out of my delivery, okay? How I did this was I used the blue, red, yellow, and gray ball, okay? And I'll throw them as hard as I could. And I would track each one, okay? And then the next week when I do the exact same exercise with the exact same weight, I try to beat that record. So for example, if I'm doing a roll-in, right, and I'm using the blue ball and I throw it at like 68, okay, the next week I'm trying to throw it at 69 or above, right? Because that's when I know I made progress, okay? And this is what I kept doing and doing and doing, and slowly but surely, right, all of that stress that I put on myself, right, by doing the max effort throwing, I was able to recover from it and come back better than before. Okay, and this is the same thing as pull downs, right? When you're pulling down, you're running as hard as you can toward the target, turning and throwing as hard as you can, right? And this pretty much gives you that stimulus or that stress to get better from. And it's teaching your body, all of this high effort throwing is teaching your body to move quickly, right? To turn on your central nervous system, right? To be able to fire efficiently, right? We're training the body to move quickly. And
I see this all the time with players where, they're just working on their mechanics, right? And obviously mechanics is king, and that's step number 5, and I'm gonna go into depth about that. But if you're only working on mechanics, but you're not doing any high CNS type throwing, how are you gonna teach your body to move really, really quick? In the games, we're moving at max efforts, right? And so we have to train to do that extremely well. If we're never training at full intent, then we're not actually gonna be good when it counts in the game. And so that's what I did with my pure velocity program. But obviously we've revamped it. A lot of science has come out. A lot of advancements have come out to where we have a little bit more of an intricate, detailed system. Especially at the ThePitcherLab, this is what we do. We don't just throw guys into a pure velocity program because that's a little bit outdated now. And so if you have any questions about that, you can book a call below. First link in the description and we can talk about it. But that's the basis of high CNS throwing is, okay, let's train what we're trying to get good at and let's train our body to move quickly, right? With a lot of this stuff, with the pitching delivery, we have milliseconds in order to produce a lot of force, and we have to train that, okay? We have to train our arm, and we have to train our intent. Like a big thing that I had to train when I was throwing slow was intent. Now you might think this is dumb, right? Oh, if I'm trying to throw hard, then obviously I'm going full intent. No, most guys aren't going at full intent, right? To push their bodies to the absolute limit of what it can produce. That is what intent is, okay? If I see a guy who's in a velo day, right, and all they're doing is, and it doesn't really look like intentful, like they're putting a lot of force into it, I just know that they don't have full intent. They have to train their intent. Because if you're going full max effort, like it should look a lot different. It should look, grunting, the intent behind it, the effort behind it is just on a different level. So that is step number 1, is you have to incorporate some type of high CNS type throwing, right? It's just gonna train your arm, your body, and your central nervous system to move quickly and explosively to start throwing harder. Now, step 2 is we need to start building a frame capable of producing a lot of force, right? Basically what this means is we have to become strong, powerful, all right? And now what this graph visualizes is this is strength, okay? Let's just say this is strength. And then this is velocity, pitching velocity, okay? Now, when you first start to train, as you gain a lot of strength, right? You're going to start throwing harder. Like that's just common sense. When people are like, oh, bigger, stronger, yeah, there's some truth to that. Like it's pretty much obvious, right? If you're super weak and skinny, okay, like if you get strong, then you're gonna start throwing harder, okay? But what the problem is that a lot of people, as they get stronger, right, they see results. For me, I was throwing 78 miles an hour, and then as I got stronger, I started throwing the mid-upper 80s. Okay, and I'm like, okay, yeah, like this is the path to throwing hard. Like if I continue to increase my squat, bench, and deadlift, I'm probably gonna throw in the mid-90s. Like that was my mindset. But that's actually a trap, because what gets you from point A to point B isn't going to get you from point B to point C. Now, if I say it in velocity terms, what gets you from, in my example, 78 to 88 wasn't what got me from 88 to 96 and 98 miles an hour, which was my peak in my professional baseball career, okay? And so this was this, and I'm gonna explain this in a second what this is. This was all of this, okay? As I continued to get strong, then I hit the 88 miles an hour. But strength ultimately is going to plateau because there's this thing called a strength base. And what a strength base basically is you cap out how much strength you're able to tap into in the pitching delivery, okay? The pitching delivery happens in milliseconds. Like you don't have like if you're doing a max effort squat, right? You have all the time in the world to get up. But in a pitching delivery, you have milliseconds. Bang, bang. So it's how much of that strength can you tap into in those milliseconds? That becomes a game. Now, let's just say you have this much strength, right? But in the pitching delivery, right, you can only access milliseconds. And so you might only be able to access this much. And so if you continue to increase this, but you can still only tap into all of this, right? Then you're not making any progress because this is what matters. This is pitching velocity, this is strength. No matter how strong you get, if you're not able to increase this, and how to increase that is something that I'm going to talk about over here, right? Yes, we can definitely get this up, right? But not many people train this. But everyone trains this. Everyone's trying to get super strong, right? Squat 600 pounds and thinking that that's gonna get them to throw 100. But they don't realize all that added strength is actually very big injury risk. Because, and I personally experienced this, okay? When I was throwing like in these ranges, right? I was able to squat like 500 pounds. Okay, and I kept pushing it. What that led to was a herniated disc because I just loved loading up my back, right? Compressing my spine. And one day, one of those discs just decided to explode, right? And that was a huge, huge setback in my career, okay? And so the heavier you go, the more you load your spine and your body, the more dangerous it gets, okay? This is like a separate tangent, but you don't want to be compressing your spine because the spine acts like a whip. Right? You want it to be elongated. You want it loose, right? You want it to be like a fluid thing rather than it be all compressed and like this, right? How are you gonna throw hard like this? You want it to be fluid. You want it to be loose. And so that's why a lot of, especially college guys, right? I see this all the time with college guys. They're on this like football, bodybuilding type program where they're just trying to lift heavy. They constantly get told, hey man, just keep getting bigger and stronger. Keep getting bigger and stronger, man. And they're like, okay, yeah, but I'm not throwing any harder. It's like, hey, keep getting stronger, keep getting bigger, right? Like if you're a college guy watching this, like you probably heard that, right? And so that's strength. Like this is gonna cap out at a certain point. And your job, right, is to identify when that happens and start working on this to continue to make progress. Now, how do you continue to make progress? What is that? This is rate of force development and ATP-CP type training. Basically what this is rate of force development is how quickly you can produce force rather than how much you can produce. You know, if your max squat takes 6 seconds, if you train rate of force development, our goal would be, okay, how can we make that 6 seconds into 1 second? How quickly can we produce that force? Okay, I've talked about this a little bit, but there was a study with 2 discus throwers, right? They both had 1 rep maxes of like 500 pounds, let's say, same 1 rep max. The first guy took 6 seconds to get up. Now the other guy took 1 second to get up. It was the same max, 1 rep max for the both athletes. Who do you think threw harder? Obviously the guy who did it in 1 second because he's able to produce the same amount of force but much, much quicker, 6 times quicker, okay? And so that's why he threw further. Right? And he was just a better discus thrower overall because he's able to produce force in these tiny windows, especially in discus, right? And it's the same in the pitching delivery. We need to be producing a lot of force in tiny windows. And that's why rate of force development is so, so crucial. And that's how you get guys who, you know, are skinny and weak, right? But they're just so twitchy and quick and they throw gas because they can produce the force in that tiny amount of window, right, to throw hard. Now, another way to train how much force you can produce, especially in the pitching delivery, is like elasticity, right? Tendon type training, right? How good are your tendons? How tight are they? Because how strong are your tendons, right? I'm not gonna go too deeply into this, but think about it like this. If your tendons are like rubber bands, right? The tighter they are, right, the stronger they're gonna recoil. And so you want it as tight as possible. And that's something you can definitely train as well with tendon type training. And I've actually created a couple videos on this. And my favorite way to do this is ISOs, right? Overcoming ISOs and yielding ISOs. And they are really, really good for the tendons. But another way to do this is to train your elasticity, right? How elastic you are. And there's a bunch more training methods that you can use as well. And so with the rate of force development, tendon training, and the ATP-CP system. And what I basically mean with the ATP-CP system is how well you're able to go from a relaxed state to a max effort state, right? The ATP-CP system is an energy system responsible for peak power output, right? Think like sprints, jumps, throws, right? How well are you able to go from a relaxed state to a max effort state, okay? And basically how you train this, right? And so this becomes extremely, extremely important to train, especially when you're getting to the higher levels, right? For me, when I'm training to throw 100 miles an hour, like this is pretty much the only thing that I'm working on right now, except for like rate of force development type training, right? I'm doing a bunch of sprints, a bunch of jumps, right? Even learning how to breathe, to relax better. Because the more I can relax, the harder I'm gonna throw. A more relaxed muscle can contract harder, right? And so those are the type of advanced training that you can get to once you start throwing in the elite ranges of mid-90s plus, right? But if you're not there yet, I would just focus on building a really good strength base and then working on rate of force development, right? How quickly you can produce force. Now with rate of force development, my three favorite ways of training this is velocity-based training. How quickly can you move a weight versus how much you can move a weight? Overcoming ISOs, right? Overcoming ISOs improves the brain and muscle connection to where the brain is better able to fire that muscle, okay? And studies have continuously shown improved rate of force development that way. And the last one is plyometrics, just a bunch of plyometrics that are gonna help move your body weight quicker, right? That's also a skill, being able to move your body and being athletic. A lot of people talk about athleticism and, especially as pitchers, we lose all of that. And so just being able to move your body and your body weight in an efficient way is a skill that is so, so valuable. That's why even in my training, a lot of it is, throwing, sprinting, jumping. That's pretty much it. Because I'm trying to be so good at moving my body. Step number 3 is your frame, okay? And so this is the obvious one where I talked about bigger and stronger, right? But with this graph, right, this is velo and this is lean mass, okay? And I'm not gonna go too in depth with this because this is common knowledge and this is probably something that you've already heard of before, right? But I do wanna touch on it a little bit because it is the foundation. So this is the graph, and this is not completely to scale, right? But as lean mass goes up, your pitching velocity is going to go up as well. There was a study with high school, college, and professional pitchers. And as you go up the level, right, the lean mass just kept going up. Like professional college players were just bigger and had more muscle than a high school athlete, right? And so a professional athlete were just bigger and had more muscle than a college athlete, okay? And obviously the pitching velocity went up as you went up the levels, okay? Now there's a couple reasons for this. Firstly, like a bigger muscle is a stronger muscle, right? If you have more muscle, then it's gonna be able to produce more force. Like we talked about here, it's just gonna help here, right? And if you're able to use that muscle really efficiently, then it's gonna help with the rate of force development as well. But the caveat is mass doesn't equal gas. Lean mass equals gas, right? You can't just get fat and throw hard. Like there was a point in my career where mass did equal gas. And it's a similar graph to here where, yeah, mass is gonna equal gas until a certain point. So for me, I was like 150 pounds at 16, and then I ballooned up to like 200, right, when I was 18, and that had a huge impact on my pitching velocity, right? I started to increase pitching velocity, and then I started throwing harder and harder and harder, right? And the weight actually really helped me. Mind you, I was a hard gainer, so most of it wasn't really fat, and I was getting newbie gains, where I was getting in the weight room for the first time, and so I was getting bigger, right? Newbie gains are OP, by the way. And so I kept getting bigger, 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 bigger. And then, again, the mistake that I made here was I continued to get bigger. And at a certain point, I was like borderline fat. Like I got up to 230 at one point because I thought mass was gonna equal gas. And what started to happen was it wasn't like this, right? It wasn't like, I wish it was like this, but it was like here, I'm like 200 right here, 210, 220, and then 230. And I started throwing slow because, I just didn't have the capability to move my body quickly, right, at 230. There's this balance to where you need to be able to move your body extremely quick, but also have a big frame, right? So obviously if I was 230 and I had a frame that could move it extremely efficiently, right, then I'm gonna throw harder. Like force equals mass times acceleration, okay? And so obviously if we increase this, the mass, then yeah, force is gonna go up as well, okay? But if the acceleration tanks, right, then the force is gonna go down as well, right? So there's a balance between you need to have good mass, but you also need really good acceleration. You need to have a solid frame, but you also need to be able to accelerate it and move it at an elite level, okay? So what actually happened here, right, was I was 230 and then I lost weight. I lost a lot of weight And now I'm 190, but that was the peak when I was throwing 98 miles an hour. I was 190 pounds, right? I was 40 pounds lighter than my peak, but I was able to move so much efficiently, right? When I was 230, it just felt like I was like falling down the mountain almost, and then I would throw. But at 190, it's like I'm catapulting down the mountain and everything's just moving so much quicker. And that was the difference, right? And so you need to find your sweet spot. And this only comes through experimentation, right? And years of training. Like for me right now, yeah, I'm trying to be more like a 210, 215 guy. But as I do that, I'm gonna make sure that it's lean mass, because the lean mass is what's gonna help me accelerate as well. The problem becomes if you're increasing mass and a lot of it's gonna be fat, right? You can't just increase muscle by itself. Being in a caloric surplus, you're gonna gain fat as well. And so you're gonna be gaining muscle, but you're also gonna be gaining a lot of fat. And so you have to find that balance, right? And so a good rule of thumb that I like is to be at least 2.5 times your height in inches, okay? So you can calculate that right now. This is like the minimum. If you're above this, then your body weight probably isn't like the lowest hanging fruit, okay? So take your height, turn it into inches, and multiply that by 2.5. And that's kind of like a good baseline of what your frame should be at. And if you're there, you know, you can continue to push, obviously. I actually do like more of like 2.75, 3. But again, if you start to really feel slow, then you might have to go back and do a lot of this stuff and really train up your body to move quickly, right? And be able to move more weight efficiently before you start to increase mass, right? Some of the hardest throwers, I mean, in the MLB, right? You look at someone like Aroldis Chapman, I mean, he's a beast, right? Especially right now, he's like 250 and he's a beast. But there are guys who are throwing just as hard who are skinny, right? The first one that comes to mind right now is Jacob Mizrowski. He is more of this guy. And I'm also going to talk about it in step 5 with his mechanics, right? He has amazing mechanics. And I'm going to touch on that in a second. But, you know, he's more of a guy who can really move his body well, right? And so that's how you can accomplish that as well. Now, step 4 is mobility. Okay, so mobility, I would say, is the smallest one out of all of these, right? And then the next one, mechanics, is the biggest one of all of them. So I'm gonna dedicate the whole board to mechanics. But mobility, right? What this is showing is this is force and this is time. And so the more mobility you have, right, the more range of motion you have, the more time you have to produce force. Okay? So I'll give you an example. If you have really tight pecs, right? You might not be able to get into scat retraction that well. So you might just be like here. Okay, now you have this much time to produce force into the ball, right? And accelerate. Versus if you had elite pec mobility, I actually have like hypermobile shoulders and everything, but like here, then you have all this time to produce force. And the more time you have to produce force, the quicker you're gonna be going. Okay, think of it like a sprint, right? If you had 10 meters to sprint versus 20 meters to sprint, who's gonna be going quicker? Obviously the guy who's going 20 meters, right? Because you have way more time to put force and accelerate, right? And so that is the biggest thing for mobility, why you need to be working on mobility as well. But with mobility, again, it comes down to this, where there is a mobility base, where like if you're pretty flexible, right? And you can touch your toes pretty clearly, you can do a back bridge, nice, everything's pretty good, then you don't have to focus on it too much. Because you don't want to become like super hypermobile and really try to push your mobility, because it comes down to the strength situation again, where the more you push it, the more dangerous it becomes, right? And you don't want to get injured by doing any type of mobility, right? As long as you have a base amount of mobility, then you're good. But if you're like me, right, who was very immobile, especially when I had my back surgery, if I had straight legs, right, I couldn't even touch my knees. That's how tight I was. And so for me, I focused like months just on mobility. And then obviously my pitching velocity shot up because that was a huge limiting factor, right? Now with mobility, the biggest thing that I will say with mobility is flexibility isn't enough. Like getting into deep ranges of motion isn't enough. You need to be strong in those deep ranges of motion. Okay, so for example, if you're stretching out your pec and your ability to go this way, but you're just, if you're just working on the flexibility there, but you're not able to actually be strong and powerful to power out of it, like in the delivery, you got to power out of this position, then it's kind of useless, right? It can actually be detrimental because if you're getting into deeper ranges of motion, but if you're weak there, then you're probably going to throw slower. So you need to train strength in this deep ranges of motion. And that's how I use like stretch strength exercises where you're using weights, right? But you're also going into a full range of motion. So for example, it might be like a Jefferson curl where I have weights in my hands and then I'm trying to get them to my toes, right? And then I'm getting out of that. And so I'm actively getting strong in a lot of these ranges. And I have a couple videos on mobility where I explain this in depth, right? Because it was a huge focus of mine for a long time. And so for mobility, just remember, yes, we need more ranges of motion, but we also need to be really strong in those deep ranges of motion. All right, step 5 is pitching mechanics. And as this diagram shows, no, I'm joking, this is a crown. I try to draw a crown because pitching mechanics is king. Right? I'd say developing the frame is about 40%, pitching mechanics is like 60%. But to make things simple, let's just say it's 50-50. Okay, you're developing the frame through steps 1 through to 4, right? And now step 5 is the other 50% because you can have a frame that's able to produce a lot of force, right? But if you're not able to piece it all together with your mechanics and actually transfer that to the back of the ball, then all of that goes to waste. Right? Step number 1 through to 4, doesn't matter if you have terrible mechanics, okay? And so I'm gonna give you guys a little bit of a checklist of what I think is important in a pitching delivery, but the caveat is, what works for me might not work for you. And that's why we have things like the ThePitcherLab where we actually look into what you specifically need to improve your mechanics, right? And by the way, like if you want your mechanics analyzed by us, then you can book a call below and we'll actually analyze your mechanics on the call. And so with the pitching mechanics, right, the couple checkpoints that I like to think about is firstly, you need to get your engine going, right, toward the target. A lot of the central theme here is going to be how well can we direct all of the energy through the target, right? Because that's where we're throwing and that's where we need all of our energy going. All right, so what does getting the engine going mean? It means getting your center of mass going toward the target during your leg lift. And there's 2 primary ways of doing this. So some guys like Jacob deGrom, right? They're here, and then as soon as they lift their leg, they're going, right? They're going toward the target. A lot of people call it a drift, right? Where they're drifting and then they're just exploding down the mountain. Another one like Roki Sasaki or Yu Darvish, they actually come to a balance point first, and then they have this slight like move right here that gets all of their center of mass going toward the target. Okay, so again, it's very individualized, but you do need to get your center of mass going toward the target during your leg lift, okay? Now, the second one is I want you to think about getting into the back, okay? So when you get into the back hip, right, what I mean by this is like in this crease right here, you should be able to pinch it. That's kind of like the feeling that I like to have because when you're here, right, your pelvis is counter rotated, you're gonna stay closed for a really long time until you have to fire. Okay, versus if you'd gone into your quad, right? If you load into your quad, then everything is just gonna open up, all right? So another thing that I really think is important is getting into your back hip right here, rather than getting into a quad or anything else. Another big mistake that a lot of people have, including me, I actually made this mistake, was getting too deep into the back leg, like doing a single leg squat. And what this creates is more of an L-type delivery where instead of going toward the target, right, it's like you're going down and then out. Instead of it being more like a diagonal, you want to go down the mountain like this instead of, right, because this is way more efficient than here, okay? And so that's why you need to control your depth. But again, it's very, very athlete dependent. I threw 95 plus doing the squat and drive type throw. But now as I'm training to throw 100, I'm trying to be more diagonal, right? And what that means is getting less depth in my back leg, but still getting that impulse from that back leg. And the third one that leads me nicely is the impulse from the back leg. Okay, you need to produce a lot of force in the back leg to throw hard. The studies have shown that the highest velocity throwers have the biggest impulse in their back leg. Basically what that means is the most amount of force going into the ground for the longest amount of time. Okay, and so if you can put in a bunch of force with the back leg, right, then that's going to correlate to pitching velocity. Now, obviously with the rotate, you need to get your pelvis open. For this, I don't like to feel it, okay? If I'm feeling this pelvis rotating, then I know it's slow, because you can't throw like that, right? Like hip to shoulder separation and separation, the stretch within this oblique sling should happen naturally, right? It should happen so quickly that you shouldn't be able to feel it. And that's why I like to feel more of a weight shift, okay? And so I'm putting a lot of force into my back leg, and all I'm doing is getting to my front leg, okay? And now if you got into your hips correctly and you're holding everything closed, then if you get to your front leg, that's rotating everything, right? That weight shift is what's gonna rotate everything. And now all you gotta do with the front leg is block like crazy, right? That's gonna block and catapult everything forward. Now, with the upper body, right? I'm not gonna go into the arm action. I actually have a couple videos on the arm action. It's a very detailed topic. But the one thing I will say that isn't mentioned very much with the upper body is tracking toward the target, okay? And what this basically means is how well you're able to direct energy through the target, okay? 80% of pitching velocity is shown through the hip to shoulder separation. How much and how violent, right? Hip to shoulder separation versus your pelvis and your rib cage, right? This separation. 80% of it. That's why if you're on your knees, you can throw like 80% of your pitching velocity. And so everyone thinks, okay, so, the drive from the back leg gives you the extra 20%. No, it's actually how well you're able to direct and track toward the target. Basically means how well you're able to direct energy through the target without losing it, this way, or without losing it. Just directing all that energy that you created through the target, okay? And a big thing that helps with this is the glove side, and I've made a whole video on this that you can go check out, but it's right here, and this has to act like a front leg block, right? This is blocking everything, okay? This is blocking everything. Once you get this, you do get a big stretch, and then as this starts to come through, this has to be stable, okay? And it's blocking everything so that the upper body can just catapult forward, okay? And so I know I ran through that a little bit quickly. I have a whole playlist that you can go check out. It's called Building the 100-mile-an-hour Delivery. You can go binge those. I talk about mechanics way more in depth, right? But this was a pitching velocity full guide, and I have videos on each one of these topics that you can go out and look. But if you're a guy who values your time, right, and you don't want to go out and figure out all of this on, because to be honest, like your baseball career, you have very limited time to get to the next level, right? Whether you're a high school guy needing to get recruited, right? You have that small window to get recruited. Or if you're a college guy with that tiny, even a smaller chance of getting drafted, then you don't have time, right? And for those guys, we created the ThePitcherLab. First link in the description below. This is where we coach guys to make sure that they gain velocity and get to the next level. We do everything. We do custom program, mechanical analysis, everything that I talked about in 10x detail. We even have mechanical specialists who have much more knowledge than I do, right? They have biomechanist degrees, they've worked at the MLB level, who will literally revamp your mechanics, right? And also we're gonna create a full program to build out your frame. And if you're interested in that, you can book a call down below. And either way, I'll see you next time.